culture is often thought of as just the intangibles versus I think what we're talking about is culture as strategy, culture as
Totally.
a product, culture as an
Totally.
experience, right?
The definitions of culture which resonate with me the most are that it's the behaviors rewarded in the system, repeated and rewarded in the system. If you have a behavioral definition of culture, then all of a sudden that takes you right to performance. So
Mm.
what behaviors are we as a system, not even us as leaders, but we as a system signaling are good and important? And what are we signaling are bad and wrong?
Welcome to Unmissables, a podcast about how leaders in product, design, and technology are building what's next. I'm your host, Ariba Jahan, and let's get into it. When did the high performance become code for burnout? Every leader wants a high-performing team, but somewhere along the way, this phrase started to mean unrealistic expectations, toxicity dressed up in company values, and people burning out while leadership just simply called it culture. But what if this is more of a design problem and not an inevitability? On this episode, I sit down with Kit Krugman, SVP of People and Culture at Foursquare. She has spent years advising companies like LinkedIn, Microsoft, and Chanel on organizational design. And now she's doing it from the inside. She sees culture the same way I see it. It's a system, one that you either design with intention or you inherit by default. So she's been redesigning it at Foursquare, running experiments that most people teams may not even want to touch, removing managers, killing one-on-ones, stripping out OKRs, just to get a better sense of what really matters in creating impact at the organization instead of just focusing on effort. We talk about what she learned, what broke, and what an 83% jump in cross-functional collaboration taught her about how culture really gets shaped and changes. Let's get into it. This is truly a full circle moment. I feel like you and I go way back, pre-babies, pre-pandemic. We met through Women in Innovation. I know right now you're at Foursquare, really creating transformation from the inside as SVP of People and Culture. Can you give us a quick look at what is Foursquare today and what your role entails?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me on the podcast. Really grateful to be here and to continue to have our lives, both professional and personal, intertwined. So I joined Foursquare a little over a year and a half ago. And I was actually working with Foursquare beforehand. I was working with them as a client when I was over at Co-Collective, building the organization and culture design practice there. And we had been working with Foursquare on high performance teaming and thinking about how the leadership principles that the CEO, Gary, had architected could really translate into how the executive team operated and how the broader organization could take them up. So that was kind of the genesis of my introduction there before I joined the team. What he was looking for someone to come in and think about how the people function could be a step change, a catalyst in how the organization actually. Let me take a step back and talk about what Foursquare is and what we do today to give you some context. We're essentially the location layer of your tech stack. So we build geospatial technology. What that means is we've spent the past 15 years now building best-in-class location technology, and that technology helps businesses use location and location intelligence to power products and make smarter decisions. So although most people know the brand and know the name as our kind of consumer app heritage, we had a check-in app, we built Swarm, which is an amazing consumer-based app. We've had a pretty strong pivot in our journey when we realized the opportunity for businesses to actually benefit from the technology that we're building. So then we spent many years kind of investing in building location technology and acquiring other players in the space. So we acquired Placed and Factual to broaden the products and services. So what our products today do is they range from serving actually the advertising, marketing, and media space. So on that side, we help connect campaign ad exposure to real world visits and sales. So how are consumers acting, buying, using their movement in the world to make smarter business decisions about ads and where you should purchase, how effective your advertising is. And then the major other side of our equation is our Places data set, which is essentially a really robust data set that powers the location layer of many of well-known consumer apps like Uber, for instance. When you type something into Uber, that's our data set being pulled in to drive the location side of the equation there. So I'll stop. That's context on what we do today, which I find really exciting and what brought me to the org.
I mean, it's super interesting because I think what is familiar to most people as the Foursquare brand versus it is now incorporated into so many other technologies that people don't even realize. You open sourced your data about 6 months ago, right? What did that create?
Yeah. So we've been, part of the transformation journey we've been going on is to increase product velocity, to really innovate in the space. We've been kind of the leading geospatial technology platform, and we've done a lot to innovate, but we really wanted to push the needle a little bit farther. And so open sourcing our places data set. So just to make one important distinction, we still have places as a product when the open source data set that we have is a limited selection of places data. So people can build with the places data set, which means that you can actually build using our places data. You can pull it in, you can build with it. And that means that people are actually improving it. So it's going to increase the quality of our data and our ability to, for the broader data set, serve our customers and partners and businesses.
So you've gone from creating transformation within organizations from more of an advisory agency side to in-house, and I think we were talking about this earlier, what differences are you already noticing as you've moved from that advising transformation and handing off a strategy, but now you're actually designing it from the in-house?
Yeah, I was acutely, when I took this role and when I decided to take this role, I was acutely aware of potentially what could be my gaps in terms of being an operator and being an executive in a tech business. And I think what I was most, let me say what I was most nervous about is when you're on the advisory side and when you're offering kind of strategic advice, frameworks, even implementation plans, change management, and all of that side, you're not in the weeds of being able to actually, unless your client brings you along, which we did have a couple clients who brought us along for longer, of actually administering it, managing it, adapting it, and doing all the things that are natural in the course of rolling out change, which is that it's not ever going to go as planned. And you're always going to have to adapt and improve and iterate. So I was nervous about, what's that going to look like for me? Am I going to be capable of the stamina that's required to continue to adapt and change and build when you are responsible for the soup to nuts? I actually have found that there's more parallels than I expected,
Huh?
honestly. Yeah, because a couple things. Number one, when you think about driving change in organizations, it really requires you to operate like a consultant on the inside. You have to understand your stakeholders. You have to articulate what you're trying to achieve. You have to drive alignment around the changes you're trying to drive. You have to design experiments and collect data to see if it's actually effective. And then you have to pull up and change. And so I found that to be actually more in line with than what I expected coming into the role. And I think actually I'd like to think that that experience has given us as a people team a little bit of edge on how we're approaching it. Like a lot of more classic people team might look at, hey, how do we do, we're setting our strategy for a year. I've tried to approach it much more dynamically to say, actually, we have a North Star that we are trying to drive in the organization. And we are going to run a series of big rocks. Like we know we want to change the performance system. And then we're going to run prototypes. We're actually going to pilot all the time. And we're going to collect really robust data. We're going to measure that data. We're going to come back to that data and we're going to see what's working. And we're going to deprioritize what's not.
Yeah, that really resonates for me. I know during my time at Ad Council, when I was the VP of Product Experience and Innovation, I had to have that same approach where the first year where I started the Department of Innovation, it was like, what's the North Star? Why do we even exist? What
Yeah.
does year one look like?
Yeah.
What should year two be based on the lessons learned from year one? Also resonate with the concept of having big rocks versus like micro experiments. And certain experiments I've had to keep close to my chest because there were experiments on culture. So
Mm-hmm.
you're running an experiment, you might have a certain part of the experiment is the way that you're articulating and communicating and storytelling versus internally, what are you looking for to be able to understand, did that new language actually resonate with the employees in order to change behavior, right? So
Totally.
it's many layers. So we're talking about culture at a moment where there's mass reorganizations,
Yeah.
DEI rollbacks,
Yep.
return to office tension.
Yep.
From your observations and your experience, what does it feel like is breaking inside companies right now? And how is that impacting trust, teams, and products that they're actually able to build?
Yeah, I mean, there's so
Loaded,
much.
I know.
Yeah, it's so loaded and there's so much to unpack there. So let me try to pick out some pieces. I think that the macro environment around us right now is really, really full of change, full of challenge. I'll leave it at that. I think that just the macroeconomic environment has resulted in a lot of tech companies doing layoffs, doing rifts, restructuring, and you're seeing a drive for higher productivity, higher performance. And you're also seeing a shift in the talent marketplace, right? Because of the layoffs, because of the rifts, because of even the amount of people who are out in the job market again, you're seeing the power dynamic shift between employers and employees, which always tends to downstream dictate the relationship that employers have with the employee population. That's kind of the broader context. I think it's all very challenging to navigate, especially as a people leader, especially as a leader in general today. And even for the employees, it's very difficult to navigate. I think there's a couple very acute things that I've been grappling with. So let me start with RTO, return to office, a kind of hot button topic. We returned to the office 3 days a week last year, last April. It was a very difficult transition for us. We had been hybrid, no remote, hybrid and flexible, no in-person requirements. We had to make that shift. I actually very strongly believe that it was the right shift for us. And you have to look at the challenges that you're facing as an organization. We're spread across 5 offices. We had teams who were all over the country, also internationally. And we were struggling in particular with speed, velocity, as I've talked about, and collaboration across silos. Those are 2 things that are very challenging when you are distributed that far. And so we wanted to increase creativity, collaboration, and speed, and bringing people together has, I mean, I have the data. It has created a step change in how we operate. However, there's a tension inherent in mandates to return to the office, that when you are trying to build a culture that espouses autonomy, independence, wants to treat people like an adult, a top-down mandate is in some ways antithetical to operating in that way. And the downstream impact is you also then need to do things like track it to create accountability. I struggle with that because it is both required to do it effectively, actually, and is in tension with some of the other things that we're trying to do. However, like, you have to make it valuable for everyone, which means that if people are changing their lives to come back into the office Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and you're not holding other people accountable for doing that, then you have actually created inequity in the system. And so this is one of the biggest challenges as a people leader, which is to say, like, the act of tracking people attending is not something we want to do. The ideal state is that if everyone actually just does it and we don't have to worry about it. So you're in that kind of tension between trusting people and having and holding people accountable.
Yeah, it's like at some point it's not surveillance and making sure that it doesn't turn into surveillance, right? Like
Yeah.
it's more about
Yeah.
culture building to your point and trusting that people are coming in the days that you all are asking for people to come in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, trust
Yeah.
works both ways, right?
Yeah.
In order to build trust, you have to be trusted. And I think the destination should always be that you're able to trust. But actually, interestingly enough, one of the biggest challenges we've had in rolling out a return to office is people saying you need to be holding people accountable more because I am doing it and it is demoralizing for me if I see someone else not doing it and not being held accountable. And so that's about the peer-to-peer accountability. And so we tried very hard to make it about, it is your team that you're showing up for. It is your community that you're showing up for. It is about our collective experience to try to come in on the same days so that it's valuable and meaningful and drives our goals.
You mentioned that you have the data that proved returning to office elevated your collaboration. I'm curious if you have any handy. I'd love to hear some.
So we measured cross-functional collaboration. When I came in last year, we redesigned the engagement survey and made sure to put things in that we really cared about. So one of the questions that we asked was about cross-functional collaboration. And That was one of our lowest scoring areas in, let's see, March of 24. We just ran that again and it jumped 83%.
Wow.
Like, wow. Yeah. And there are other reasons. Like, I can't point to return to office being the only reason, of course. There are other reasons. We have, we made some big changes. Our org is smaller. We've done a ton of flattening, which we felt was really important. And so that's going to have that impact too. However, with all three of those vectors combined, an 83% jump in cross-functional collaboration is wild.
So, in your recent article, printed it
Look
out.
at
In your recent article, you say that culture is not the warm-up act for performance. It's actually a system. And I think that's one of the reasons I immediately wanted to bring you onto the podcast, because you're one of the few people that I've seen talk about culture in a more systematic way. So tell me, what's your current working definition of performance in this context? And we'll dig more into this.
Yeah, let me maybe start with my definition of culture, which is I think that the definitions of culture which resonate with me the most are that it's the behaviors rewarded in the system, repeated and rewarded in the system. If you have a behavioral definition of culture, then all of a sudden that takes you right to performance. So what behaviors are we as a system, not even us as leaders, but we as a system signaling are good and important, and what are we signaling are bad and wrong? Professor Todjick at Columbia, someone that I've had the benefit of learning from in the past, said in a conversation we had once, he said, you can just look at who is succeeding and who is not to get a very close pulse on the culture. But that's about what are the behaviors? How are they behaving? And so when I came into Foursquare and I was working on this remit of like, what does cultural transformation look like for us? How do we move the needle? How do we make sure our leadership principles are really pervasive in the culture? I started to narrow in on performance because performance was kind of the end game of how we actually pull up on behaviors and send signals both to individuals, to teams, and to the organization about what matters. And I realized if we didn't start from that and we didn't get that right, then nothing else would matter. Like nothing else would actually pull through as comprehensively as performance.
So interesting. There's this concept called culture debt. I don't know if you're familiar with it. So it's similar to the concept of tech debt, where, the idea is that when you neglect culture, it ends up leading to an accumulation of issues that end up hindering performance. But you may not notice it as the accumulation happens, but end up noticing it where it's accumulated enough that it's been dramatic. So how do you see the relationship between culture and performance, and how can organizations proactively address that potential culture debt?
Yeah, I love the idea of culture debt because I think it articulates something that is difficult to articulate, which is that culture has this accelerating or dragging force on an organization, right? And if you have debt, you have antibodies working against your goals in the system. You have people frustrated. You have people, honestly, even a gap between expectations of how how you're saying the organization should operate and how it actually operates on the day to day. And so I think that that's where you can close the gap and solve culture debt most effectively, is to ensure that what you are saying matches what you are doing. I mean, I've been saying this for a very long time. A lot of other leaders have said this, but doing it is actually hard because it's very easy to espouse a set of values. And then when it trickles down to how people actually operate in the organization, it isn't the ground truth. So it needs to be the ground truth.
Yeah, systematizing principles is so much more complicated than I think any of us ever imagined, until you're like in it and you're like, we said we're going to be transparent.
Yeah.
How transparent on what?
Yeah. And you have to ask all those hard questions, which is like, what does this transparency gain us? And what is this transparency helpful or harmful? Right.
Is it transparency for the sake of transparency, or is it actually creating a meaningful sense of feeling informed, right?
Yeah.
So I know that you're in the throes of implementing this approach at Foursquare. What are you trying? What strategies are you implementing? Or in your words, you mentioned you approach this as experimentation. What experiments are you running, and what have you already learned?
Yeah. So when I came in, just specifically, let me talk about performance specifically. When I
Yeah.
came in originally, the first year, I just audited performance. I just watched what everyone was doing and watched how it was administered in the system. Two pieces of interesting context for you. We had kind of pulled out annual performance reviews because of Gary, our CEO's belief that they're a little bit of an antiquated feature, like to just pull up once a year and talk about performance is so unrealistic. Back to our conversation about the world and how it's changing, so unrealistic to have the actual operating cadence of a business. And so he had pulled that out, and the team that predated me had put in anytime feedback, which I'm a huge believer in. Setting up a system where people are actually giving genuine, helpful, meaningful feedback is is a big step to the future. However, that is a massive behavior change. And so to take out the kind of system and then shift to wanting people to behave in a certain way and wanting them to give feedback all the time is a massive change. And so what ended up happening is that on the ground, we kind of took out the formal structures and put in a more informal structure, but people weren't fully, it was actually adopted a little bit, but people weren't fully adopting it. And so we ended up downstream running into issues where people weren't getting the feedback that they needed to grow. And so when I came in, I started to observe how many performance improvement plans we were putting people on, and how actually, in some cases, those were the first time that people were getting meaningful and genuine feedback, and they were improving. And so when I pulled up with Gary about that challenge that I was seeing in the organization, I started to do this kind of mad map of all of the different performance levers that we had and how they were not really speaking to each other. Like we were doing a calibration, but it wasn't really pulling in the feedback. We were doing the feedback and we had a career matrix, but we weren't necessarily using that for that. And I just said, I drew it out and I said, this is a collection of parts. We need an ecosystem that actually works.
Connects it all. Yeah.
So we started off by defining what was important to us in terms of performance at Foursquare in today's world, in today's context, and informed by our leadership principles. And where we landed with that was this idea of team-based performance. So we fundamentally believe that high-performing teams are more impactful than a team of high performers. That's our grounding belief. And then we translated that into behaviors at the individual level and at the team level. And we published that with the organization. So we did that first. And then from there, we needed to identify a piece of technology that actually supported what we wanted to do, which was to split the difference between a annual review, which is a once a year kind of thing, and robust ongoing feedback. We wanted to create key moments where we checked in and collected data from people, but we had the opportunity to provide continuous feedback, continuous recognition year round, and continuous impact tracking. So we ended up going with a platform called Confirm. Have wonderful things to say about them. They're kind of a challenger in the space, and they are trying something very different than some of the other players. Have a piece of their technology which delivers a network analysis called an ONA, and it does a very lightweight network-based question. So you ask people in the organization, like, who's a gold star player? Who would you flag for more support or attention? Who's influencing you? Who's energizing you? And with that very quick question set, you can get a really robust picture of the organization and kind of the talent density there. So we put that in place, and we ran kind of a performance check-in that was our step change from the annual performance review that set the baseline for how we're going to run this in the future.
I really like that network of analysis because first of all, if you only talk about this once a year, you're not going to remember who are all the other people you worked with throughout the whole year, right? And I think sometimes bias you to recency as well as like what you might consider big projects versus maybe other people you collaborated with that were for a moment. So one of the other things I really enjoyed about your article is how performance is actually the visible outcome of the invisible design that happens in culture. And that concept really made me think about all the tangibles and intangibles of culture. Like when we think about artifacts, right? Unspoken rules, whether they were created intentionally or unintentionally. You know, sometimes culture may look aligned on the surface, but actually the system underneath will tell you a different story. So how do you mentioned auditing, how do you surface what's invisible but
Mm-hmm.
is shaping everything, those default behaviors, the unspoken rules, the structural decisions that most leaders might overlook.
Yeah, I think you need to continue to name it. I think that what you're saying, which I believe in, is that there are explicit values and there are implicit values present at all times. So explicit values being the stated principles and the stated values of the organization, what's important to us. Implicit values are the ways that we behave that signal to people what is important to us. And I think that the bigger the gap between explicit and implicit, the more disingenuous the organization seems, and the harder it is to actually avoid what I would call I'm sure there's a very clever word for this, the pitfalls of organizational culture and context, which are things like politics, which are things like, you know, infighting, which are things like looking for enemies on the inside versus trying to galvanize around something exciting. Organizations are social constructs. People are going to behave the way that they behave in social situations. And they're going to look to the rules of the organization to understand, how do I play this game? And if we're thinking about it any other way, then we're not going to be able to design. So you have to say, if you find something that is implicit, to me, it's my responsibility to surface it. If I see, hey, we're saying this is really important, but we keep doing this thing that tells people it's not, then I have to pull up with my CEO. I have to pull up with my leadership team to say, we need to understand the gap between this and why people are perceiving it as a gap, and make sure that everything we do is aligned to these leadership principles that we say are important.
Culture is often thought of as just the intangibles,
Yeah.
like the offsite or the ping pong table available to you, versus I think what we're talking about is culture as strategy, culture
Totally.
as a product, culture as an
Totally.
experience, right?
Totally.
So I know you just renovated performance at Foursquare. Can you share an example of what you've redesigned and how that shaped what actually got prioritized, built, or shipped at the company?
Yeah. So we're still in progress, is what I would say. And we've seen a ton of changes because we were able to pull up and do our engagement survey this year after doing it a year before. And we've seen a ton of extremely positive changes on specifically velocity. We had a huge leap in velocity. We also, since the moment that even before I came in, Gary, our CEO, was trying to think about how we could increase shipping products and speed to market. And that we have improved enormously. Like if you look at some of the massive changes and things that we've gone to market with and gone live with over the past 6 months, you'll see much more activity from Foursquare than you've seen in the past couple of years. We've open sourced our Places data set. We've kind of renovated some of our major products. We've cleared out a lot of tech debt. We've been doing a lot of action-oriented things. And what we're trying to do in the system is move from effort tracking to impact tracking. So the way that it's recorded in the system is we actually ask people to pull up at any time and track their impact. And then we also do an intentional 3 times a year check-in on network and impact.
So how do you do that? Asking people to evaluate or reflect on their impact more readily?
Yeah. So essentially we do the performance system that we're using. We are running this very short network survey. And at the end of the network survey, it asks you, please track your impact over the past 3 to 4 months. And the impact questions it's almost like project based. The concept of like in schools, there's sort of a shift to project based learning. When you're operating in more of a dynamic environment like this, we're not asking people to kind of pull up at the end of the year and say like, well, what did you achieve this year? We're asking people to track.
Like a retrospective, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We're actually asking people live to track projects and impact associated with those projects and to build that muscle. And even in that form that asks you to say, hey, share your impact, it also asks, who are your collaborators, and prompts you to ask for feedback from them, so that you have built into the system a project-based collaboration fueled feedback mechanism that's focused on outcomes, not effort. The last conversation we were having made me think about something that I wanted to share with you, which is that when I started at Foursquare, we were talking a lot as a people team about what we wanted to be. And I pulled up an image of like Maslow's hierarchy and the way that I saw the people practices. And I said at the baseline, if you're leading a people practice, you need the functional pieces of the organization to work, meaning you need benefits to be administered. You need people to be paid. You need the technology to work, people to be onboarded and offboarded in an effective way. Once all of that is running smoothly, you're able to go to the next level, which is like, how do we support growth and development? How do we make sure that people can thrive at this organization? And once you have gotten to that layer where you're supporting those kind of systems and more of the like system design component, you can go to more of the cultural transformation piece, which is to say like, well, how do we connect our principles to the way that we operate and act and behave? But the pinnacle of the pyramid to me is that you've transcended to the point where you are no longer the one enforcing and reinforcing frameworks, the people are. Like that's the destination. Because even though my title has culture in it, I am not responsible for the culture. And I say this to my team all the time. We are not the culture. It is a collective responsibility. It's a social construct, and it is supported by the systems that we design and enable and equip. But success looks like other people saying, that's not our culture. We wouldn't do that here. You know what? That's a problem. And being a self-reinforcing system, that's kind of the actualization of culture design exercise.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of system and this tension between culture is actually everybody versus your team can be the shaper and the keeper of the systems that keep it going, right? You also said that you can't coach speed, right? But you have to architect it. Talk to me a little bit more about that. What does fast but sustainable look like inside a team, inside a company? Especially because I know there's a big connection between performance and velocity at Foursquare right now.
If you just say to someone, go faster, like, what are they going to do? You know what I mean? Like, it's sort of like, okay, I'm going to try to write faster on this paper. But if you give someone the pieces that enable them to go faster, like you give them more context. So let me talk about something that slows you down. Someone's like, build this product faster. Okay. Why, when, for what? Like, but if you provide like, hey, we have a really unique opportunity where if we build this layer of location tech into X, Y, and Z, then this partner is going to be able to leverage this, and that's going to potentially generate X amount of revenue. It's going to fuel the business. Like, how quickly can you get it done? Like, context motivates speed, and removal of friction to that speed enables that speed. I think you can't just ever tell anyone to go faster. You have to create the conditions for speed, and you have to remove the barriers to speed.
And that feels like behavior, technology, processes, all these different facets of a system, right?
Yeah.
That you can also tell people to use a certain technology and they may never use it, right? Or
Of
use it
course.
in a different way
Of
than
course.
intended. And so I think that's like the feedback back to you guys in terms of, is this working and how do we have to pivot, right? Whether it's coming from the pandemic or before that, I think when we see certain words like speed, velocity, high performance,
Yeah.
I think typically they have become the signals of like, is this a toxic workplace? Should I be worried? But it sounds like from the way that you're approaching it, it's more about how do we nurture the system or bring it to people with so much intentionality that speed is a given, velocity is a given, high performance is a given versus, forcing it. And the other side of that, you talk about designing for recovery, not just delivery. What
Yeah.
emotional dynamics do you think a system needs to hold space for in how you design it?
Yeah. Well, I have a kind of provocative view about burnout right now, which I'd love to share with you,
Yeah,
which
go for
is,
it.
yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it. And I really believe in the kind of deeper definition of burnout, which is that a lot of burnout comes from isolation, disconnection, the feeling of not doing work that is meaningful or important, or that no one cares. Like there's nothing more like disengagement. There's nothing more demoralizing than spending your time and energy, which is which is our most precious resource, right? It is our most precious resource on things when you don't feel energized, connected, or cared for. And so what I've come to believe is that when people are in a high performing environment where there are high expectations, where they're learning a lot, where they feel energized, where they feel like their work matters, then speed is invigorating. Then shipping things is validating. And collaborating is stimulating, and it doesn't produce the downstream impact of burnout. When we're talking about, like, I feel like where the burnout conversation collapses is when it comes to like sheer hours worked. I think right now, with the amount of technology that is like emerging to drive productivity, I think we can work smarter and get the same amount of stuff done. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this as a mom. Like, I work less hours than I used to work, but my work is smarter and more impactful and more scalable.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think when you think about high performance, what we've seen is certain behaviors get perpetuated in organizations because their culture wasn't diagnosed. Their processes and the behaviors that were getting perpetuated weren't looked after. Versus what you're saying is let's do the things, but not at the risk of people's well-being, right? Is making sure that those two things are in balance.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, the other thing is you come from a background of narrative and storytelling, right? Like, I also realized you were a teacher.
Yeah.
And I was like, this makes so much sense. You and I talked about how powerful storytelling is as a leadership tool. So I would love to hear a moment where you've needed to use that in a way that it helps people shift behavior or understanding some of these changes that you're bringing to Foursquare.
Listen, I think that storytelling is everything in my mind. And I know I come with the bias of having studied it, worked in it, been in places where it's really been really important. But storytelling goes back to the things that we were just talking about, which is storytelling is context. Storytelling provides context that enables people to make decisions, to bring ideas to you, to be able to feel empowered to participate. Storytelling invites people in. Storytelling also helps people emotionally metabolize change. So, you know, the story that you are a part of, you're inherently always a part of narrative creation, and simultaneously people remember things through narrative creation. So you are either at any given moment telling yourself a story that you are valuable to an organization, that you're doing important work, that you matter, that it matters, that this is worth it, or you're telling yourself the opposite story. And those stories are influenced by micro behaviors. That's why culture matters so much, because the thing about the thing about the human experience of doing anything is that it's a deeply emotional experience. One day you could feel really good about what you're doing, where you're doing it, who you're doing it with. And then one thing happens, maybe even you didn't get a great night's sleep, and you have a meeting where someone says something offhand about, say someone was like, well, the people team isn't that impactful. And I didn't get a great night's sleep. And I'm like, oh my God. And all of a sudden I'm on a spiral. Well, how could you be more
Do I
impactful? And
even
maybe I'm not.
matter?
Do I even
Why
matter?
did they hire me?
So I've been saying this a lot lately, but I think you have to be negotiating the value proposition with people on a daily basis, not a macro basis. Every single conversation as a leader is explaining the context of why the work we are doing is important. Even at the micro level on the people team, I feel like it's my job as a people leader to say, isn't this amazing that we're getting to learn from transformation work every single day? Isn't this amazing that we just redesigned the performance system? Isn't it amazing that compensation's up next? Isn't it amazing? Like, because I believe it's amazing, but for me to give that context to the team I hope helps them feel energized, excited, and galvanized to do something and to participate in it.
There's the bigger storytelling that might be more presentation. And then there's the micro storytelling that you're talking about, which is the moments. What information are you carrying out? What information are you sharing? What enthusiasm are you sharing
Yeah.
about the moment that you're in, about the little projects, right? So I think both are really, really powerful. And it also speaks to how you show up as a leader within your team and the work that you're excited about, right? To get them to rally behind it too.
Yeah. And it has to be grounded. The last thing I'll say is it has to be grounded in truth. Like, storytelling for storytelling's sake is actually dangerous and bad, in my
People
opinion.
also can see through it too.
Of course. Yeah. It has to be grounded in truth and belief. And that can be, to your point, like, we're learning, we're experimenting. We might not get this right. That's okay. We're going to keep trying.
So with the rise of vibe coding, and all of these generative AI tools, one of the things I've told my team is we don't need to know every single one of them, but we do need to know how this technology works so that we understand where we're building up our expertise. And I think even those things, right? Like, it's not about waiting for us, very special moment to be like, we are now doing this. It's like, no, this is happening. Let's get on it right now.
Yeah.
Right. So then that becomes story building with the team as well. In preparation for this conversation, I wanted to look at some numbers, right? So according to Deloitte did a study back in 2024 with executives across all types of companies. And they said that 67% of execs actually say culture is their biggest barrier to speed. But only 22% actually have a strategy on how to address it.
That checks out.
And, given that you've got such a systems lens into it, what's something you believe about performance design that would probably get pushback in some rooms?
Interesting. I mean, let me first answer this on like a higher altitude, and then I will go to that, which is I think part of the challenge is that the HR function in general has been historically a very operational function that has long wanted a seat at the strategic table, and I think has made major strides. Like there are incredible HR leaders who are thinking about things differently. And, we've seen the rise of programs like the one I went to, which was the organizational psychology program at Columbia, which is amazing, incredible program. And so I think that educating people, leaders, and business leaders as systems designers is a big piece of changing that picture, because that gap, that 22% to 67%, is people just not knowing how to handle the complexities of human behavior in organizations, the psychology of people coming into a shared social space. A lot of that is actually deep and complicated work. And so I think it's our responsibility. I see it as my responsibility to shift the role that people teams can play in that space and closing that gap. Just to, that's something that really galvanizes me and excites me about the role that I can play in the space. I mean, I think a lot of the practices that we are experimenting with more broadly would get pushback. Like we've been getting rid of a lot of classic managerial roles. We've been flattening and discouraging people from one-on-ones. Like that's a very big provocative change that I'm not sure everyone would agree with.
What do you mean by discouraging one-on-ones? Like one-on-one meetings?
Yeah.
Say more.
Yeah. So we've been pushing to flatten the organization and remove as many processes and get rid of OKRs, KPIs. We are doing some very radical. I think some of that would get pushed back in more traditions. But because of the more processes you add in, the more managerial structure you add in, the slower you go. Our hypothesis was the only way to rebuild effectively with velocity at our core is to strip it all back, to remove meetings, to remove one-on-ones, to remove managers in a lot of cases, and to just say teams are the important thing. The team's the unit to figure it out. Meet as a team to figure it out. You can have ad hoc one-on-one conversations if that's helpful, but it is the removal of like a classic structured weekly one-on-one with a manager. It is the removal of retros and classic kind of engineering processes, is basically prioritizing speed over classic management and process management.
So you're minimizing this inheriting of, well, I'm a manager now, I have to meet one-on-one with everybody, versus like what actually creates progress, and let's like architect around that, right? That's kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And we're also putting the ball in the court of employees too, to proactively invest in their growth, right? So in a classic managerial organization, a manager would say, this is what I want you to focus on or grow on. Whereas we're trying very intentionally to foster a more entrepreneurial culture. We want people to come and say, hey, I'm really interested in growing in this way. How can you support me? But that is a behavior shift that is only possible if you kind of remove the backstops that prevent that from happening, and you stop doing classic top-down activities and you start from scratch. I put this in the article, but we saw a dip in our engagement data around coaching and feedback, which we expected to see when we removed a lot of managers, because when you don't have those structured one-on-one conversations, every organizational design choice is a choice that has pros and cons. And so we opted for the pro of speed, removing process, removing friction, and accepted the consequence that we were going to take a hit on classic performance and coaching. But now what we're working on is putting back in other ways that people can get that feedback, get that coaching, get that growth. For instance, we're running a program in team effectiveness where we pull up teams, intact teams, and coach them on team effectiveness and how to give each other feedback dynamically. So like you have to replace it with other things. Otherwise, you default to the classic practices.
That's an interesting approach because when you scale back on classic, then at least it gives you visibility into what is needed versus what might have just existed, but it's not something people missed once it was gone, right? And then you can be more intentional and strategic creating that structure.
It's an opportunity because if you miss something, and Gary talks about this a lot, it's like, let's go, if we strip things back, then we can put back in minimum viable, right? But you only get that data if you're missing it and you miss it for a while and you can identify what you're missing about it. Are you just missing the habit? Are you missing the interpersonal connection? Are you missing the actual like skill coaching? Because a lot of skill-based coaching doesn't happen in a one-on-one. It actually happens on the job. It happens when you're working together. So I think that's where, you kind of have to challenge these things that have existed as classic practices in order to really interrogate their utility.
Culture in some ways can feel invisible. In many ways, it is visible. And I think it's both the big decisions, the small decisions, the big behaviors, the small behaviors, all the way from like the all hands to the way that you've structured documentation must happen, context sharing must happen, right?
Yep.
What level of information needs to be shared in order for somebody else to do their job really well? What types of email communications are we normalizing? All of these things, right? So I'm going to go through a few rapid fires. A career move that maybe made no sense at the time, but changed everything for you.
The first real job I had was I took a job as a presentation designer at an advertising agency in Boston. It was at a time where it was very difficult to get jobs. And this was the single job they had open. And so I just applied. And I hadn't done any actual design work ever before. And they had a design test that I had to take. So I literally read cover to cover the InDesign, how to do InDesign book to prepare, which is hilarious in retrospect. Now I would have just asked ChatGPT to tell me how to do it. And I ended up getting the job. And a couple people said it was a dead end job. They were like, you're going to get stuck in this job for years. You're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to do anything. But then I quickly realized that I was going to collect a couple of different things that were just absolutely fundamental. Number one, the ability to translate ideas to visual communication has been a gift that keeps on giving. Like doing deck design, being able to take your thoughts and put them in a cohesive, compelling, beautiful, relatively beautiful, I'm not that good, but relatively beautiful space has been a gift that's given me so much. Number two, I was out working on the new business team and I was working with all the leadership of the company. And so here I was at 22 working with this leadership group that was trying to transform the company at the time. And so that was my first exposure to transformation, to executive leadership, to the way that you pitch and sell a business and the narratives that you have to create in order to win business. And again, that was a gift that kept on giving. And also because I was working with that leadership group, it became within 8 months, I was in a different job because that the opportunities were there. I was able to show my value, show my worth. And there was an opportunity that arose to help manage the creative department. And I said, I know I have no experience doing this, but I really want to do it. And because I had built those relationships and shown that I could be valuable in that context, they gave me a shot. So that job completely transformed my career and is honestly a big reason that I'm here today.
That goes to show the relationship that you build on the job as well as what you're able to show in terms of your execution, that can speak volumes. You have a very systems approach and a kind of organizational psychology based approach to how you approach culture. So people that are listening and thinking about how they can design for performance, what's one piece of advice you have for them?
If you're thinking about designing performance, I think you have to start with the outcomes. Like, what are you actually trying to drive and what problems are you trying to solve? Just like any classic consulting project. Because you have to look at the behaviors in your organization that are not serving your business objectives. At the end of the day, this is the business exercise. And you have to look at the activities and the behaviors that will drive your business objectives and say, how do we single-mindedly focus on those things? And what would we need to do or change to drive those things?
One trait you think every leader who's trying to be future ready needs to build within their organization?
Emotional self-management. Emotional regulation. I think that this has been my biggest revelation about being a leader in this context and going through a lot of change and having to navigate it while simultaneously having a toddler at home. Feel like I'm dead serious. I feel like I'm going on this learning journey as a parent when you see this like dysregulated toddler being like, I wanted that candy. So you're trying to teach your toddler to identify the feeling that they're having, to understand it, to connect with it, to articulate it, and to let it pass so that they can actually get what they want. As a leader, are going through your own emotional journey. You are doing hard things. You are doing things where you have a barrage of emotions back at you. And even the most advanced, self-actualized, self-realized person is still going to struggle to connect. Like, why do I feel so drained, exhausted? What is the impact of these emotions coming at me and how I'm absorbing them or how I'm reacting to them or how I'm defending or how I'm triggered by them, impacting how I show up? And you have to shore up your boundaries to be able to identify those things, to say, okay, this is hard for me. And yet it is my responsibility to show up as a leader and to be a sturdy force. I love Dr. Becky. She just did a great podcast with Tim Ferriss, and you should listen to it. But she talks about sturdy parenting, and it made me think about sturdy leadership. Like, what does sturdy leadership look like in a time of radical change? And it means something very specific to me, which is you are emotionally resilient.
Sturdy leadership, sturdy parenting. I need that.
So do I, trust me.
I feel like I'm losing all the battles.
Well, we were up from 2 to 4 a.m. last night, as I mentioned. Yeah. Putting my toddler back in his bed. So, I can't say we're getting it right.
But you have to keep showing up, apparently.
But you know what? I keep showing up.
I relate to that so hard. So you've said the future of work isn't coming, that it's already here. What's an unmissable shift that leaders need to make immediately to keep up with how the future of work is already changing?
Obviously, this is redundant with a lot of what other people are saying, but if you aren't thinking about AI and thinking about the impact of AI on your future workforce and on your skills and where you need to show up, then you're already behind. Not to sound, just demoralizing, but you just start using it, start experimenting with it, start thinking, and start educating yourself. So I think that is fundamental. I don't know where the future of hybrid work is going to go. I really have always hoped that we're able to retain the best of what we gained in the pandemic and also regain what we lost too. And what I mean by that is I think that hybrid is the destination. I think the freedom and flexibility that it's given people to be able to work from home or work remotely sometimes is amazing, and that there's no substitute for co-locating. And I believe that very strongly. And co-locating in lots of different ways, whether that means that you are a completely remote company and you come together in offsites and intentional, or whether you co-locate on a weekly basis. I don't think there's any backing away from that kind of return. But I hope that we also are able to regain to the flexibility and freedom and openness about like how work gets done and how impact gets driven, because it's benefited so many communities.
Kit, thank you so much for making the time to have this meaningful conversation with me today on the Unmissables podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure. I always enjoy my conversations with you, whether on podcasts or not. So
Same. Thanks for listening to the Unmissables with the Reba Jahan podcast. If today's conversation sparked something new or made you think differently, be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. And if you're enjoying the show, please consider leaving us a rating or review. It really helps more listeners find us. For past episodes, show notes, and the Unmissables I'm paying attention to, subscribe to the newsletter on Substack or visit unmissableswithariba.com. See you on the next episode.